In our final sub-lesson in Lesson 2 of configuring AD in complex environments, we're going to look at configuring sites in Server 2016. Well, sites and all of the components associated with a site. Now let's talk about what a site is. Sites contain subnets. So both sites and subnets allow you to create logical objects inside the ADDS configuration partition. Remember, that's one of the 3 partitions in the ADDS database that are associated with the physical entities within your network. Specifically, your locations, your geographical locations, and the subnets associated with those geographical locations. By creating subnets, we use the IP address from the client computers to determine what site they're in. Hence, we can use the SRV records to forward their request to the appropriate DC that's within their site or the site closest to them, or as we talked about previously, it goes into a random generation of DCs to be able to respond to that request. So that's what we're looking at as we go through this sub-lesson here. Now, when we start looking at AD sites and subnets, first off, you need to be an enterprise admin. You can't be a local Joe Smo here to do this. And there's usually 3 reasons for you to create an additional site. Replication management, because now we have more control over inter-site replication than just with the intra-site replication. Group policies is really powerful. We can actually create a group policy object, or GPO, and link that to site objects, which will apply that policy to all the users and computers in that site. So let's say we have unique settings for our users in London. We can create a subnet in a London site and associate a GPO with that. Think about how powerful that is. And another reason is the service location. You can use the information stored on your client machines to help locate the most appropriate or closest SRV record. And when it comes to managing our sites and subnets, we can obviously use Active Directory sites and services. If we want to create a new site, we're going to use the new-AD replication site. Pop a name in there. I mentioned London already. And if we want to create a new subnet, we'll use a new-AD replication subnet, and we'll supply the IP address range, and we'll specify the site. So these are the tools that we'll use when we're working with sites and subnets. So at this point, we have our new site called London. Let's say we created another new site called Dublin. We've created subnets within each of those sites to identify the computers within there based on the IP address. But now we want to identify the replication process between those 2 sites, and we do so using site links. Again, you need to be part of the enterprise admins group. This is not just a local administrator's job. Initially, all of the sites are connected to a link called the default IP site link. Remember, all of our sites are in the default-first-site-name. This is something similar to that. All the links are by default stored here in the default IP site link. And similar to the default first site name, where you can move DCs out of that site to new sites that you created, like our London and our Dublin, for instance, you can also move your links out of the default IP site link after you've created additional site links. 2 tools to manage your site links, your AD sites and services, and a PowerShell command, new-AD replication site link. You'll give it a name. We're going to call this one London to Dublin, and then we'll do a -sites included. And we'll specify the sites that we've created as we've done here with the London and Dublin. If you have slow or non-persistent connections between the 2 locations, you'll want to use SMTP protocol. Otherwise, you'll use the IP protocol. Regardless of which protocol you use, you'll have 3 properties to specify when you create this site link. The first being cost. It's really an arbitrary number. It's not a $sign. And this is going to represent a preference as to whether that link should be used if there are multiple paths. So it's more of a priority, and the default value there is 100. Replicate every. By default, it's 180 minutes. We can reduce this to as low as 15, so our changes are propagated more quickly. And then you'll have the schedule of when the replication will take place. Maybe you don't need the replication to take place after hours. You can specify the schedule of when this replication will take place. So you'll use site links to configure and connect multiple sites. After configuring our sites, our subnets, our site link bridges, there's a few items I want you to be aware of when it comes to working with this new infrastructure. First off, there's 2 conditions where you'll want to use site link bridges. When your IP network is not fully routed, or if you want more control over the replication flow. Remember, as we just discussed with bridges, we can determine the schedule for the replication and how often within that schedule. After creating your site, you're going to want to move the DCs from your default first site name to one of your new sites. You're going to use Active Directory sites and services to do this, or you can use the move-AD directory server commandlet to move those DCs. And remember, all DCs will land in that default first site name if you don't specify a new site location when you're adding a domain controller. And as you can imagine, all the physical sites, let's go back to London, they're going to require access to a domain controller in order to be authenticated. If they can't, we can add that London subnet to a site. We could deploy an RODC, a read-only domain controller. Remember, an RODC is read-only. It has less attributes, so less information can be compromised. Or you can rely on an automatic site coverage where you have a domain controller from an adjacent site that's also registering its SRV records for your smaller site, which enables your clients to locate a domain controller. So again, your clients need to be able to access a DC for authentication purposes. And now that we've talked about our site configuration components, let's step out to our image and work with these components. So we're back into Windows Server 2016-2. We're going to go to our tools, and you know where we're heading. We're heading to Sites and Services. Makes sense because we're managing sites. And we get in here, we're going to expand on sites. You'll see we have an option for inter-site transports. And of course, our default first site name. Let's go ahead and create our London site. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on Sites and do New Site. And I'm going to type in London. And I have to associate it with a site link. We just talked about we have the one default IP site link. I'll go ahead and do an OK on that. It's been created. And it's telling me to go and create subnets for that. But before I do that, I'm going to create one for Dublin as well. And again, I'll just use the default IP site link, and we'll go ahead and do an OK that. So we have two sites out there now. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to right-click on Dublin, and we're going to look at the properties of Dublin. And you're going to see I could provide a description, and it's looking for those subnets we just talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel on that. And so now we're going to look at subnets. We're going to go up to subnets. I'm going to right-click on subnets and do a new subnet here. And we'll go 10.0.0.0/16, and then we'll associate it with London, and then we'll go ahead and do an OK. And then we'll create another one, new subnet. We'll do 20.0.0.0/16, just to keep it simple. And then we'll go to Dublin, and we'll do an OK. So now I'm going to go back to London, and I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to go to Properties. And you'll see now we have a subnet associated with London, as we do with Dublin. So that creates two new sites and subnets within those sites. So you'll see we still have our default first site name here. I go to the properties of that. Similar to what we just created, no big deal. And if I wanted to, I could rename that. We talked about the possibility of renaming that if we're going to put a DC in every site. So at this point, we're ready to move our DCs to these sites. So I'm going to go into Servers here under the default first site name. Right-click on MTP1. Do a move to London, right-click on MTP2, do a move to Dublin, and then go ahead and do an OK. But now I want to create a site link. Notice we have the two protocols, IP and SMTP. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on the IP, create a new site link. We'll call this London to Dublin. We'll pop over London. We'll pop over Dublin. We'll go ahead and do an OK. And now we have a new site link. I'd have to create another site link in order for us to actually create a site link bridge. So these are steps necessary to create a new site, adding a subnet into that site, moving a DC into those sites, and then creating a new site link using those two new sites.